What's up YouTube, Daryl here from Zephyr, and today I am bringing you a budget and an OTK update to Yubel. That's right, so I know a lot of you instantly questioned, well, how is Yubel not budget? Well, for those of you that see the most competitive list that is playing a Yubel themed, not just here's a Yubel engine in branded, people are using the Unchained engine. Now, at the base minimum, it's not that expensive, but when you start taking into consideration Unchained Soul of Rage, which is currently between £15 to £20 a copy, and then of course SP Little Knight, it blows the budget out of the water. Whereas with this build right here that I'm going to show you, you can very easily build this for $100 or less, very, very easily, whether you get everything in one go or whether you pick up the pieces as you go. So with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. I'm going to dive headfirst into the profile, explain what we've got, why we're using it, and just the overall playstyle of this deck. So you're going to start with the only main normal summon of the deck, and that is your Samsara D Lotus. You can play 1-for-1 if you want to. Personally, I felt that it was probably more of a neg one than anything else. With this deck, the idea is you're going to get an additional draw because you're always want to go second. Yes, okay, that does hinder the Spirit of Yubel a little bit. I would have liked this as if it was declare an attack, or if they declare an attack on you, you could summon it down. But the idea is that if your Samsara D Lotus, you kind of want this to resolve, which is why we're playing a lot of cards to either clear our opponent's board off, negate our opponent's board, or just being able to make sure that this resolves as successfully as possible. We then, of course, are playing triple Spirit of Yubel. Now, the best thing about a Yubel deck, whether you want to play budget, OTK, or anything, it has so many different variations, which makes it very, very flexible. So in this build alone, there are a couple of cards that when I get to them, I'll explain that you can change them out for other alternatives that can change the playstyle of the deck and make it even more control. And that's where your side deck can come in massively helpful. I'll also put a demo deck list in the link in the description below, so you can have a look at it, and then you can see all of the different variations that I've also suggested, and I will suggest throughout this video. So again, you can adapt it, test it, and see if it works for you or not. So triple Spirit of Yubel, pretty straightforward and simple on this one. This is how you're going to be able to get into your original Yubel. Now this will become a lot cheaper once we get the Battles of Legend, which comes out this Thursday. Currently pre-orders are like £7 online for an ultra rare, whereas a super was like 30 quid, which is absolutely crazy. Same for the Terror Incarnate, and same for the Ultimate Nightmare. All of these are being reprinted. All of them are £7 or less as an ultra rare, so you should be able to pick these up very, very easily. I do advise at the very least pre-ordering Yubel and one Terror Incarnate. This one you'll probably get a little bit later on because it's not as staple as the other two. But ultimately the idea is to pick these up now because I do feel that from the influencer openings, I didn't see many of them, and talking to a couple of people as well, there's no guarantee that a huge amount of this product's going to be opened. It's probably going to be more sold as sealed. We've then got the one Geist Grinder Golem. Now, the reason we're only playing Geist Grinder at 1 is, yes, it is a great way of getting the Spirit of Yubel out of the hand, which kind of makes you tempted to play this at more. If you do, it's not a bad idea to give this to your opponent because you will then gain the 3000 attack. And what a lot of people do get confused about is the idea behind this, where it says at the bottom, during damage calculation, if it battles a Yubel monster, your opponent gains 3000 life points. Now, the idea is that your opponent is going to have the Geist Grinder Golem, so you are now, you become the opponent. So just kind of clear up a little bit of question on that one as well. Just kind of feeding back on some of the most recent comments that I've seen on videos. Try to explain them in the profile so you can understand them. So the reason we're playing Geist Grinder at 1 is because we're also playing a very small Kaiju engine. So you've got the one Yugioh, the one Raiden, and the one Thunderstrike. Now the idea of these is you want to be giving these to your opponent as they are the monsters that are above 3000, and that's how you can complete your OTK, because the idea is you get Spirit of Yubel on the board and Yubel, both of those attack into the Yugioh or the Thunder King, and that's going to be able to do your opponent's 6000 plus damage, and then in main phase 2 you overlay both of those, you go into the Gustav Max, and you burn your opponent for the final 2k. The reason we've got the one Raiden in here is because if you do just hard open this and Kaiju your opponent, giving them a dark is going to be a lot easier because it gives you another super poly target in your deck because you can get into Starving Venom. Yes, of course, no matter what Kaiju you give your opponent, of course you can super poly it off in order to get into Yubel. But if you're unable to get Yubel on the board before you can do anything and your opponent hasn't set out their board to be super polyed naturally, and you hard open this over any other Kaiju, you give this to your opponent, you could then super poly to make sure they've got 2 darks on the board and get you into your Starving Venom. Or of course you normal summon any of your dark monsters, get any of your dark monsters to the board, and then super poly it off. As we want to try and attempt to break the board, we are also playing triple Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. You don't have to play this. I just like the idea behind this, because the one thing you want to be doing with your Yubel monsters is you want to be able to clear your opponent's board while also leaving them with a monster. So that's where you get the benefit of the Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, because not only will it give you a boss monster yourself, which can be any of the big boss monsters here, but it also allows you to place this in any zone your opponent controls, meaning that you can then make your Relinquish Anima and steal it, and straight away you've got 6,600 damage on the board, and all you need to do is get a little bit more, which you can do with additional burn cards that we do play in the deck. It's entirely up to you. So being able to clear your opponent's board, yes, this can be Ash Blossom, but you've got a lot of cards in your deck that can be Ash Blossom technically. So if you're getting ashed on this, then your other ones are pretty much free to rock and roll. Of course, you can consider playing other board breakers in the form of Forbidden Droplet. The reason that I'm not playing Forbidden Droplet in the main deck is because reducing your opponent's attack is all well and good, but you still want your opponent to have a monster of 3,000 or more on the board. If you don't go down that route, that's when you're going to be going into the trains a little bit more with your Gustav, Max, and Yubel, because that's going to give you multiple attacks. So you could very easily play droplets if you wanted to in the main, and that's just one of the flex options that you have. So we'll go back to the Yubel cards themselves, because we're only playing 5 of the spells and traps. So we've got 3 of the Nightmare Pain. Everyone that plays Yubel should know how important this card is. Very, very easy. This gets you into all of your Yubel cards. It allows you to pop your Spirit of Yubel, which will ultimately lead you to your normal Yubel. And this is the one that makes sure your opponent takes all the damage, as well as having to attack your Yubel monsters where able. The one Mature Chronicle, there will be times when you can loop through Yubel monsters and monsters that list Yubel to get as many counters as possible. But usually, more times than not, just getting the one to special summon original Yubel back from the grave can be very, very helpful, especially if you've already super polyed off, because that's going to give you your Yubel monster with the burn factor, and then you're able to bring back your original Yubel to then attack and get even more damage on your opponent. But of course, if you get 5, you're very easily searching out super poly. We've got the one Eternal Favourite. Of course, I feel 1 is more than enough in this deck, just because we are designed to go second, so it's not the greatest card to be opening up or going for, unless you cannot guarantee the OTK or the clearance of the board. That's when you would then get to Eternal Favourite. Being able to set this up, being able to clear your opponent's board off is very, very important. And then the other one that is very, very themed of this deck, but this is the engine that can very easily become the Nadir engine. And the reason we're not playing the Nadir engine is because I feel there are a lot of versions or a lot of builds out there that have cards in their extra deck that they don't mind getting sent to the graveyard. But it really does come down to preference, local kind of capacities and everything else. So we decided to go with Neos Fusion. So shout out to Kyron on this one, who of course helped me kind of put this build together. But the reason you play Neos Fusion and of course the one elemental hero Neos as a surprise is you can also play the elemental hero Neos Kluger. Now the reason Kluger is so good and it can come off the back of the Neos Fusion is because it lists specifically Yubel and Neos. And then what this does is this gives you the ability to burn your opponent. Now, if this phase-up card is destroyed by Battle or leaves the field, of course you can special summon out Wise Man. Now, you're not going to want to be able to do that the turn it's summoned, because Neos Fusion locks you from doing so. But the idea is that once you've played through everything, if you need that last little bit of damage on the board or a last little bit of monster on the board, you can Neos Fusion, send Yubel and Neos. Now, obviously, the biggest issue with that is you are sending Yubel from the deck or the field to the graveyard. So you would need to get it back to the field in order to use it, because throughout more times than not your normal combo, you're going to be getting it to the board, you're going to be able to get it to the graveyard, so you need to make sure you're getting it back to the board. But the idea is that with Neos Kluger, before damage calculation, if it battles an opponent's monster, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to that opponent's monster's attack. So that's then going to be able to attack into pretty much anything, even if it crashes into a 3k monster and do an additional 3k damage. It can crash into the Kaiju, dealing your opponent 3,300 and then killing itself, which isn't the end of the world, but the idea is you've burnt your opponent for an additional 33, which can be very, very important, especially if you've already played through a lot of effects as well. Like I said, the reason that this is flexible is for the pure fact that you do go through your bell quite quickly. So you do very specifically need to make sure you get it onto the board. Or of course, if you haven't been able to open up a route to your Nightmare Pain or of course your Spirit of Yubel, then you'll be able to use Neos Fusion as one of your last cards. So you could go Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, get your 2 monsters on the board, then turn a Samsara D Lotus rather than going to Spirit into a Relinquish Anima, steal the Kaiju, and then of course activate Neos Fusion, and straight away that is way over. So that's 9,600 damage onto the board. So Again, it can be flexed out. There are loads of different options, just as I mentioned with the deck list that's in the demo below. You can play more hand traps if you want to, but because we are go second, we kind of want to break boards. I'll show you the hand traps that we are playing in a minute. And the idea is that you're just going to either want to break boards, you want low investment card combos. So your Samsara D Lotus is one of them, Interrupted Kaiju Slumber is one of them, Neos Fusion is another one of them, and then of course Super Poly is another one of them. Now, with the Yubel deck, it has the best Super Poly target in the entire game, in my opinion, and that's, of course, just original Yubel. The reason that I feel that this is the best one is the fact that it requires a Yubel monster, so it does give you a little bit of flexibility, as well as being able to fuse the entire board and provide burn damage can be very, very important. Of course, you do play your normal Super Poly targets in the form of Mud Dragon, and then, of course, Starving Venom. It really is down to you and your local environment of what is so important, what they are playing around with. If they are playing more targets that run into Grora, you can double that up. If they're playing more targets that run into Mud Dragon, of course, double that up as well. So you're just getting as much consistency as possible. And then, of course, we also play Triple Tactics Talents. I feel that, again, because we're going second, being able to either draw, steal, or even look at your opponent's hand can be very, very important, especially when you're playing cards like Interrupted Kaiju Slumber that instantly say, okay, I need to get rid of this or I'm going to lose my board, can be very, very important. Another thing on top of that is if they don't negate the Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, even if they've got a monster that cannot be destroyed, you then still get your Kaiju, which is strong enough to deal with most monsters. Of course, you need to use a little bit of common sense in regards to if you're facing Fire Kings and you're destroying cards, special summoning monsters, you need to be aware of Princess and everything else. So for a hand trap, you could very easily consider DD Crow, but the one that we're going to be considering more in this version of the deck is, of course, Dimension Shifter. Now, the reason Dimension Shifter is so good in this deck is technically you don't need your graveyard massively at all. As you've noticed, we do not play the Sacred Beast engine, which is the one that does utilize the graveyard as well as the Unchained monsters. But the idea behind D-Shifter is the only thing it really affects is quite possibly your Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, because it doesn't go to the graveyard, meaning you can't banish it to search a Kaiju out the next turn. Everything else within reason can come back from the banish zone, like Yubel. Your Neos Fusion doesn't need to send it to the graveyard. It just needs to send it as a fusion material, so it allows you to play around with D-Shifter as well. And just being able to drop this on your opponent, especially in this current meta, can ultimately end an entire turn. Another card that you can combo off the D-Shifter with very easily is, of course, Nibiru. Now, like I said, we are going second, so you want your hand traps to be either Floodgate outs in the form of D-Shifter or board wipes in the form of Nibiru. You can consider, of course, Droll and Lockbird if you want to, but ultimately when you're playing Shifter and Droll, you can't do both, so they can become a bit of a clash. And there are times where a lot of players are more used to playing around Droll than anything else, and it's a lot harder to play around Shifter if it does become successful. You can consider Allure of Darkness in this deck because you do play loads of dark monsters and your dead shifters can then be banished. But you do need to kind of keep in mind exactly what you're looking for and how you're trying to do it, which is why we're going for the most successful single cards that ultimately end up stopping a turn. Rather than an Ash Blossom that needs to be activated at the exact time in order to do anything, you can utilize cards like Nibiru or like Shifter. If your opponent is consistently playing around Nibiru or never going into Nibiru territory, you can cut this out completely and change it for something else a little bit more successful. We then, of course, do play the one Called by the Grave, pretty standard on that one, and of course, triple Infinite Impermanence. So you do need to be a little bit careful that if you're going to get hit with Triple Tactics, Talents, or Thrust as well, so you need to keep that in mind. But the reason that Imperm's in here is it's a great card for going first or second. If I decide to hold the Imperm and my opponent ends their board with one on the negate in a style, I can draw into Imperm, or I have Imperm already, activate at the start of my turn, negate their Baron, or trade a Baron for an Imperm, which is absolutely fine, because then it means the rest of my board is going to go on unanswered unless they have particular hand traps, which again is something you need to be aware of. So if you go to a local environment and you're like, my opponent is always opening up multiple hand traps, you could then consider stuff like Gravekeeper's Inscription if that helps you out, Prohibition if you are targeted by a specific hand trap, Crossout Designator if you are really worried about very specific hand traps, but then that will adapt your hand trap lineup itself in general. What you need to remember is if you drop a Shifter on your opponent, you instantly don't need to worry about Droll, so that's one of the big issues that you don't even need to consider. This is a 42 card deck, but these cards can be taken out if you want to. I just went with the main deck of Lightning Storm. More times than not, well, probably 99% of the time, you're going to want to be using this on your opponent's back row. So this really does come down to the local environment if it is back row heavy. You can consider stuff like Cosmic Cyclone in its place as well, which can be more effective because it allows you to chain to some of their effects as well as being able to deal with the Fire King Island. But the one little catch that you need to remember with Yubel is you don't want to be clearing all their monsters off, because if you do, unless you're going to be activating Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, destroying one of your own monsters, you're not going to be able to give your opponent a monster in order to do the damage you need through the back of your Yubel cards. So carrying on into the extra deck, of course, we are playing 2 Yubel, the Loving Defender Forever. Pretty straightforward and simple on that one. And then, of course, the 1 Elemental Hero, Neos Kluger. Because this does specifically list Yubel, you can very easily play Fusion Deployment, and you can also play Fusion Arraignment, which is also probably a little bit more effective because it brings the Yubel back from the graveyard rather than from the deck, which you're going to be doing naturally through Yubel, Spirit of Yubel anyway. So it's something to consider, and if you wanted to add that in, and that's where your flex spots can kind of come into play and change around with your Kaijus and everything else. For the other Super Poly targets, of course, we've got the 1 Starving Venom, we've got the 1 Garura, and of course Mud Dragon, alongside the 1 Earth Golem at Ignista. Again, this one is kind of a little bit high in price at the moment, it's like £5. But the idea behind this is 1 Link monster and a Cyverse monster, which more times than not your opponent is doing if they are playing the Fire King Snake Eyes build, because they'll be ending usually on an IP Masquerena, which is your Cyverse, and then a Link monster, which is the Amber Whale. So being able to get rid of those and go into this guy can be quite helpful, but it really does come down to your personal preference. And then, of course, we've got the 1 Almirage. The reason for this is you can turn your Samsara D Lotus into the Almirage, and that will ultimately lead you to Heater, which we'll talk about in a second. Relinquish Anima, again, we're a little bit more aggressive, which is why we're not playing the Link Karibo. So being able to relinquish Anima, and then especially when you're playing Interrupted Kaiju Slumber and placing them where you want them to be, you can take that monster and then push for an OTK. Muckraker, when there are the times when you don't mind fiend locking yourself in order to bring back from the graveyard, can be very, very important. That will then give you the ability to discard a card, bring back Yubel, and then that can set you up for your fusion plays during your opponent's turn if you need it. Cross Sheep, because there will be times, yes, okay, your targets are very, very limited. Like, I think your only target is Samsara D Lotus, but the other is you can bring back your Samsara D Lotus during your opponent's turn, or heck, even during your turn if you need a card that needs to be treated with the Yubel. But again, it's a flex spot in the extra deck, you can adapt it. This is usually what you're taking out for like more super body targets, more specific targets, and then of course other kind of boss monsters that you might have access to. Stuff like Appaloosa could be considered, Boral Sword, Access Code, SP Little Knight, IP, all of those just open up the budget doors, but it really does come down to it. The Dark Charmer is another good option as well. That can then allow you to steal from your opponent, but the idea is you need something to climb up to, and one of the best options to budgetly climb up into something is Boral Sword, which can come off the back of Heater. Of course, if you really want to, you can spend 20 quid on a Promethean Princess and then like £5 on an Amber Whale, and you can do the exact same thing your opponent's going to do to you, to them. But the idea is you don't really want to be relying on the graveyard so heavily, but there are just flex spots you can mess around with. And then you've got a rank 10 engine of the Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav Max, and then obviously the Yubel that can go on top of it. You can play other rank 10 options if you want to. The idea is this just fits into the OTK capabilities itself, and then when you're considering your side deck of stuff like Forbidden Droplet, that's when this can come into play and be more effective than anything else as well. So that's it for the entire main deck and the extra deck. For a demo side deck, it really does come down to what your local environment does involve. It really is. Now I'm going to try and see if I can find it, just so I can show you my demo one. So this is one that came from, this was Magispectors that I used the other day, but it's just to kind of show you how consistent most people's extra decks are. So for my Magispectors, I was playing Triple Cosmic Cyclone. I was playing Lightning Storms, but obviously they're in the main for this one because we'll go second. Harpy's Feather Duster, evenly matched. Nibiru's are obviously in the main. You got Ghost Bells and you got DD Crows. So then you can start considering stuff like Forbidden Droplets, you can consider Draw and Lock Birds. It really is up to you. That's what I'm saying, where you've got so much flexibility. The one good thing about Yubel is you can shift up your playstyle. You can go, right, okay, cool, I'm now going to go first instead of going second. Or if your opponent thinks they're going to catch you out and make you go first, you could look at playing the Shadow engine, which I really do like the idea of, and I wanted to kind of put it into the deck. There just wasn't enough space. And the idea is you would play Free Shadow Fusion, which again kind of acts like Neos Fusion, and in the sense that it's just a one card, get a fusion play going, which can ultimately lead you into an App Clone, which sets up a negate. You go Aerial to banish from their graveyard, and then of course you go Dragon to pop a back row. So you're putting more bricks into the deck, but you're giving yourself more options, especially if you're going second as well. On top of that, you can also, with the Nadir package, consider playing the App Clone already, because then you can use Nadir package to send the App Clone. App Clone can then search you Schism, and then because you're playing with a lot of darks anyway, you can basically window lock your opponent during their turn. So once they commit their summon, your one summon can then be your Super Poly, clearing your board off, going into your Yubel, and then you're able to kind of push from there the next turn. So So it gives you a lot of different options. It really does kind of slow your opponent down, which is really cool. The fact that it can utilize Super Poly like no tomorrow is insane. And the deck's only going to get better in Legacy of Destruction because we get a more consistent way of getting to Samsara D Lotus, as well as some additional monsters to kind of help aid the general strategy and play of the deck as well. Anyway, I hope this has given you a couple of ideas on the own build. Like I said, there are so many different variations and changes to it. It really does come down to your personal playstyle and preference. I wanted to provide a build that I haven't seen before with the Kaijus in as well. And of course, Neos Fusion to kind of give it a little bit of a nice GX era feel to it as well. But again, they are completely subjective. Take them out, adapt them to what you see fit. Like I said, Nadir package very easily goes into that place. Shadol package could fit that space as well. So you've just got loads that you can play around with and adapt to see what plays or works best for you. Like I said, I'll put the deck list in the description below. Go and check that out, and then you can adapt it as you see fit, see all of the different options, and then work it to your strengths as well. For now, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. Till next time, as absolutely always, stay safe, and of course, happy dueling.